Hurried footsteps echoed on the cobblestone streets of Ephesus, a bustling and vibrant city. But that night, something was about to happen that would change the history of early Christianity. A young man, his face hidden by the shadow of his hood, ran hurriedly, holding a scroll carefully hidden under his robe. Danger lurked around every corner. He knew that if he was caught, his fate would be sealed. Death awaited him. But the contents of that scroll, the secret he carried within him, could forever alter the course of the Christian faith. The young man was Timothy, a faithful disciple of Paul, and what he knew could end his life or change the course of history. Timothy was not just a disciple. He had been chosen to continue Paul's mission. However, his story hid secrets that few knew, and those secrets put him in danger. What had Timothy discovered that made him a target? What secret did he guard so jealously that his life was constantly at risk? The truth about Timothy has been obscured over the centuries, but what you are about to learn will change the way you view early Christianity. If you want to know the truth, stay with us. Next, we will reveal something surprising about Timothy's legacy that will forever change your perception of the Christian faith. Timothy was born in Lystra, a small town in the Roman province of Galatia. From his childhood, his life was marked by a silent conflict, a battle between two traditions that would determine his destiny. On one hand, there was his mother, Eunice, a devout Jewish woman, who taught him the scriptures and the commandments of the God of Israel. His grandmother, Lois, also reinforced these teachings, telling him about the prophets and the promises made to the chosen people of Israel. For them, Timothy was a special child, destined for something far greater than the others. But within his home, there was also another powerful influence. His father, a Greek respected among the Gentiles, did not share the faith of Eunice and Lois. A man dedicated to Hellenistic culture, he believed in reason and human wisdom more than in religious tales. For him, the faith of his wife and mother-in-law was mere superstition and weakness. In this environment of conflicting influences, Timothy grew up torn between two worlds. In the mornings, his mother instructed him in the ways of the Lord, speaking to him about Moses, David, and the great prophets of the people of Israel. But in the afternoons, his father led him down a different path, showing him the grandeur of Greek culture and teaching him about the philosophers and the gods of Olympus. This internal conflict was what shaped his character and identity. And as he grew older, Timothy began to wonder about his true destiny. Would he follow the path of his mother and grandmother, dedicated to faith in the God of Israel? Or would he adopt his father's teachings, pursuing human knowledge? At 12 years old, Timothy already felt the weight of this dilemma. At times, he saw the sadness in his mother's eyes when his father mocked his prayers before meals. But he also saw the pride on his father's face when Timothy showed interest in Greek philosophy. This internal conflict tormented him, and he didn't know how to find a balance. One evening, after a long day of school, Timothy overheard an argument between his parents. His father, irritated, told his mother that the boy should stop wasting time with ancient stories and begin learning something truly useful for life. But Eunice, in a firm voice, replied, "The knowledge of men may lead to earthly greatness, but the wisdom of God leads to eternity. Our son needs to know the truth." Timothy, hiding behind the door, felt his heart beat faster. What was the truth? Confused and full of doubt, he went for a walk through the streets of Lystra under a starry sky, with the moon softly illuminating the city. As he walked, he thought about his mother's words. The truth, he wondered, was there really a divine purpose for him? It was then that his mother found him, gently taking him by the hands. "My son," she said tenderly, "doubt can be a burden, but it's also a calling. You must decide. Will you follow the broad path that leads to human recognition, or the narrow path that leads to truth?" Timothy felt a chill run through his body, and although he didn't yet have an answer, he knew his life would never be the same. A change was coming, something that would transform his life forever. A few days later, the city of Lystra was shaken by the arrival of a man who would change Timothy's life. A Jewish preacher named Paul arrived in the city with a group of followers, and his message was beginning to have a great impact. Timothy heard rumors about this man, who had once been a fierce persecutor of Jesus' followers, but had now become one of the most fervent disciples. Although his mother spoke of Jesus as the promised Messiah, many in the city warned that following that path could be dangerous. Despite the risks, something inside Timothy compelled him to listen more. One day, Paul began preaching in the central square of Lystra, and Timothy, filled with curiosity, approached the crowd to hear his words. Paul's preaching deeply touched Timothy's heart. Unlike Jewish teachers who focused only on the law, Paul spoke of a love that transcended rules and traditions. Salvation is not obtained by the works of the law, but by faith in Christ, Paul said with conviction. Timothy felt a chill when he heard these words. It was the first time anything had made sense to him like that. God's grace spoke directly to Timothy's heart. After the sermon, Timothy timidly approached Paul, who, upon noticing his presence, looked at him with a smile. "What is your name, lad?" he asked. "Timothy," he replied nervously. "And who taught you about the God of Israel?" "My mother and my grandmother," Timothy replied, "have always told me that He has a purpose for my life." Paul looked at him for a moment, as if he could see beyond Timothy's words, and then, placing his hand on his shoulder, he said, "Perhaps that purpose begins now. Come with me." Those words were enough for Timothy to make the decision that would change his life. He didn't know what the future would hold, but he felt deep down that this was the right path. And so, following Paul, Timothy left his home, his family, and his hometown to follow an uncertain but hopeful destiny. The journey was long and arduous, but Timothy never lost sight of his goal. After days of walking, they arrived at a city where Christians met in secret. Persecution grew increasingly fierce, but the group continued preaching boldly. One night, as they met in a modest house to pray, the door was broken down by armed soldiers who burst into the house. The Christians were dragged, beaten, and taken prisoner. Amid the chaos, an elderly Christian man was brutally executed for refusing to renounce his faith. Timothy, horrified, watched as the man of God lost his life for his belief in Christ. That night, as they fled from the soldiers, Timothy felt stronger than ever, but also more vulnerable. Paul comforted him, assuring him that faith was the only thing that sustained them in the midst of persecution. "No one is born prepared for this, Timothy," he said, "but faith keeps us strong, even in the darkest moments." After this terrible episode, Timothy began to question his ability to continue on his path. But something inside him told him he must keep going. It was at that moment, in the midst of persecution and suffering, that Timothy began to discover the true purpose of his life. Faith was not just a belief, but a force capable of transforming even the most difficult situations. This episode in Timothy's life has been kept secret for centuries, but it is a testament to his faith and perseverance. Although many are unaware of the details of his life, Timothy's story is a powerful reminder that despite hardship and suffering, faith can be a beacon of hope in the midst of darkness. After that night of persecution and death, Timothy understood that his life as a Christian could never be simple or secure. In Paul's letters to him, he constantly urged him to stand firm, to be courageous, and not to faint in the face of challenges. Paul knew Timothy had a mission to fulfill, and although he often felt weak and overwhelmed, he reminded him that true strength came from God. These words became Timothy's lifeline, and he felt called to be a voice in the midst of chaos, a faithful witness for Christ in a world filled with persecution and suffering. Shortly after the events in the city, Paul began making plans for a new missionary journey, this time heading south toward Corinth. He knew that the Christian people needed support, direction, and strength more than ever. Timothy, always at his side, prepared to accompany him. Throughout the journey, they faced not only persecution from the Roman authorities, but also hostility from those who did not accept Christ's message. In every city they visited, Christians were subjected to ridicule, attacks, and sometimes violence. However, the love of Christ continued to guide their steps. Timothy, though young, had become a pillar within the group. His wisdom, which seemed to come from a deeper place, gave him a special serenity in the midst of the storms. Many of the Christians who knew his story saw in him a man marked by suffering, but also full of hope and faith. Paul, always attentive to the needs of his companions, began to entrust him with more responsibilities. In one of Paul's best-known letters to the Corinthians, he mentions Timothy with a proud statement, "For I have no one as trustworthy as Timothy, who will remind you of my ways in Christ, just as I teach everywhere in every church." Over time, Timothy became one of the pillars of early Christianity. His faith never wavered, and his character was shaped by the persecution and adversity he experienced. The journey with Paul was only the beginning of a life dedicated to spreading the gospel, a life marked by courage, faithfulness, and perseverance. One of the most momentous moments of Timothy's life came when he was entrusted with the task of pastoring the church in Ephesus, one of the largest and most complex Christian communities of the ancient world. The city was known for its great temple dedicated to Artemis, one of the wonders of the ancient world, and for its vibrant cultural life, filled with philosophy and debate. The Christians in Ephesus faced not only religious opposition from those who worshipped the gods of the Greek pantheon, but also philosophical pressures that challenged Christian principles. Timothy, despite his youth, began to face the challenge with determination. He often felt intimidated by the city's powerful intellectuals and by the defiant attitude of new converts who questioned apostolic authority. However, Paul, in his letters to Timothy, gave him clear instructions on how to lead the church with humility and conviction. He reminded Timothy not to be intimidated by his youth, but to be an example to the believers in word, conduct, love, spirit, faith, and purity. Let no one despise your youth, Paul wrote to him in one of his most moving letters. Be an example to the believers. Over the years, Timothy's influence in the early church grew exponentially. However, the price he had to pay for his loyalty to Christ was high. As he progressed in his ministry, Timothy witnessed the difficulties faced by Christian communities. Persecution came not only from the outside world, but also within the churches themselves. Disputes and divisions arose. False teachings infiltrated, and the danger of distorting Christ's doctrine was ever present. The young pastor never let these divisions discourage him. On the contrary, he dedicated himself wholeheartedly to maintaining the unity and purity of the Christian message. In his letters, Paul urged him to be firm in the truth, but also to be patient and teach with gentleness. Correct doctrine must be upheld, but the attitude of the pastor must always be that of a servant, he told him. However, as time progressed, the tension between fidelity to the Christian message and the pressures of the world grew ever stronger. The church in Ephesus, like many others, faced the threat of apostasy. Many were falling away from the faith, seeking answers in the world's philosophies. Roman persecution intensified, and Timothy's emotional toll began to weigh heavily on his shoulders. Although he never strayed from God's call, at times he felt exhausted and overwhelmed. One day, as he walked through the streets of Ephesus, reflecting in the many struggles he faced, a group of church elders approached him. With a look of respect and affection, they said to him, "Timothy, we know you are young, but your words edify us. Your faith, though tested, remains strong. Keep going, for you are an example to us all." These words were a balm to Timothy's heart, which at that time felt like its strength had ebbed away. From then on, he took renewed courage. He knew that his mission was not only to preach, but also to build up his brothers and sisters in Christ, to guide them with love and direction, and to be faithful to the message Paul had entrusted to him. Timothy's story, although often overshadowed by other prominent figures of the early church, such as Paul or John, is a story filled with courage, faith, and determination. He was a man who, despite difficulties, never let his youth, his weakness, or external circumstances separate him from the call God had for him. His legacy lives on in the letters he left to the churches, in the teachings that still guide us today, and in his example of perseverance in faith. Through Timothy's life, we learn that the Christian path is not easy, but with faith, determination, and a heart willing to serve, we can face the greatest challenges. His story is a testament to the power of God's grace to transform lives, even in the darkest moments, and to the importance of faithfully following the call He has given us. If this video has inspired you, don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. And of course, share your experiences in the comments. Together, we can build a strong and positive community. Thank you for joining us on this journey of growth and transformation. See you in the next video.